And welcome to our webinar today, all on persuasion and influence. So this is the latest of our APPA webinars, where we look at the science of influence and persuasion as it relates to business in New Zealand and Australia. In terms of me, my name is Toni, and I've been lucky enough to work with APPA now for the last couple of webinars, and I'm a workplace trainer that specialises in working with small and medium businesses in New Zealand and Australia. My expertise is around leadership, marketing, sales and customer service. And what I tend to do is take best practice and then practically apply this to the smaller business environment, where often the owner is the salesperson as well as the inwards goods and the admin person as well. I work with both B2B and retail customers and understand some of the real challenges that we face going into the 2020s. Influence and persuasion is something I'm really interested in. I've studied this for over the last 25 years, and there are some really practical, basic things that you can do in your business that will really make a difference to get customers to say yes. Understand that when we're working through things like influence and persuasion, what you'll do is you'll find yourself nodding to it for a lot of the themes we work through. And that's really because when you're in business, you tend to do things that are the right things to do, and you don't necessarily think about, I guess, the principles around why something works. So what I'm hoping that today what you'll do is find yourself nodding for a lot of these techniques, because they're likely to be things that you do in your business. And what I'll be really trying to motivate you to do is to either be more deliberate about how you implement these things, or if it's something that potentially you're not doing often, how do we motivate you to do that more? So let's get going. Firstly, in terms of the social psychology around influence and persuasion, it's all about trying to get compliance or getting people to say yes. And there's often a range of different people that we're working through, whether it's customers, friends, staff, or others. And obviously politicians are a classic example that really try to find ways to influence our decisions. In terms of today, my lens is really around customers. I haven't really got too much around leadership, but I've snuck in a couple of leadership slides where I think it really dovetails nicely into the story that we have. Influence and persuasion. So what's the difference between the two? And they're certainly related to each other. If I influence people, it makes me more persuasive, and the more persuasive I am, the more influence I tend to have. So you tend to have this circular model. Technically, they're not the same thing, but they belong to the same family. And influence tends to be a little bit more long-term in terms of the impact, and persuasion tends to be a little bit more short-term orientated. What we'll find today is that we're going to blend the two up, and when I'm looking at some of the studies or the science behind this, often there's a bit of a mismatch in how some of the researchers describe things. So for us, we'll be focusing on influence and persuasion, and where possible, I've used the language from the research itself when I've looked at some of these principles. So if I'm looking at research around influence and they've used the word persuasion, then I've used the word persuasion there. So for today's session, they're really interchangeable, even though they do have a slightly different meaning. And I guess the interesting thing with influence and persuasion is they're the really positive things, that the above the line, really positive things that you can do with people. On the flip side of that is manipulation and coercion. So they're the two opposites of influence and persuasion. What we need to make sure is that as we get better at using influence and persuasion techniques, is stay well clear of manipulation or coercion. We always want to be doing things that for the good of our customers or the good of our people. I'm going to start off with just really talking about influence and persuasion as it relates to, I guess, sales and I guess leadership as well. And we're going to start off talking about EQ. EQ is emotional intelligence. And the term emotional intelligence first appeared in the 1960s, but it didn't really become popular until the mid-90s. And emotional intelligence describes the ability or capacity to perceive, assess, and manage the emotions of oneself and of others. And our EQ is how one measures emotional intelligence. And when we look at emotional intelligence, the higher your EQ is, the higher performance you tend to have within the business. And the type of people that are in demand with companies these days when people are looking to recruit are people with high EQ. And in fact, high EQ is one of the top 10 skills that companies are now looking for when they're employing. Now, when we look at the drivers of EQ, there are 5 key areas: self-awareness, motivation, self-regulation, social skills, and empathy. For me, the 2 that I always really like to work on with my customers is self-awareness. So you're aware of how people perceive you. So when you maybe think that you're being assertive, do people sometimes find that aggressive? You know, how do people perceive how you act and how you work with them? And it's not just being self-aware. If you're self-aware, you need to be bothered to do something with it. And this is where self-regulation comes in. So it's not enough to know how your behavior affects others. It's as important that you're prepared to do something about that as well to get the best out of them. So editing your behaviour to change how others behave will probably have a significant impact in terms of your ability to get compliance. When we're talking about sales, in sales in particular is kind of the lens that I'm mostly talking about today. What's really important is that people tend to buy from people they trust. And often when I'm working with businesses, they tend to think that customers trust people that they like. And up to a certain point, that's correct. So let me take you through this. The Trust Continuum has 2 axes. One is personal trust and one is professional trust. And those are the 2 factors in the Trust Continuum. And basically, personal trust is how likable you are. What is your likability? And your professional trust is your credibility. So do people believe that you know what you're talking about, essentially? So the question that I always like to ask is, if a customer doesn't like you and they don't believe you know what you're talking about, will they buy from you? Well, I mean, if they're desperate and you're the only supplier of that product, yes. But if they've got choices, they're not going to buy from you. So the next one is, if somebody likes you but doesn't think that you know what you're talking about, will they buy from you? Not a lot of the time. And it's really important when I can't emphasize this enough, is when I'm working with customers, people over focus on likability. Now, it's not that it's not important, it is extremely important. But what is even more important is professional trust. And interesting, if you've got professional trust and people find you credible, but they don't like you, they're more likely to buy from you than if they like you but don't find you credible. And the more technical your product is, and the more people need for something to be right. And, you know, for you guys, it's, you know, if you're putting customers' branding on products, or if you need some environmental certification, this becomes really important for customers to know that what you say is true and correct. Now, if you get your professional trust as well as your personal trust, and I've put this in green because that's where the sweet spot is. Once you're likable and credible with customers, they're much more likely to buy from you. So when we talk about trust, it's really important that we understand that there's actually a physiological effect when we're working with people. And we need to understand that when we're working with people, people have different ways in which they react to us. And sometimes it might be that we make people feel good about themselves, or it might be that we make people feel uncomfortable. And normally what happens is there's a change in brain chemistry as our body and our customers' bodies react to what we're talking about or what we're doing. And, you know, to me, it's really lovely when we do all those nice things. But what is a real challenge is when we have trust disconnectors. And as salespeople, it's often a challenge for us if customers think that we're nervous or if we don't look confident. That will automatically fire up adrenaline and cortisone. So it makes the customer get quite anxious. And if you're running from a bear, that's fantastic. But, if you're trying to sell a customer corporate gifts, then that's probably not the reaction that you want. And to me, the only time you would want a customer firing up with adrenaline is if you're taking them to an amusement park. If you're not taking your customer to an amusement park, then really you need to make sure that you do have good EQ and that you are finding ways to connect with customers, and that you understand that if you do seem nervous, if you aren't confident in what you're doing, or if customers don't think that you're an expert and know what you're talking about, then it can be a really big trust disconnector. And it's tough if we break that trust with a customer, or if customers all of a sudden think, oh gosh, Toni's got really nervous, she's blushing, she's quite aggressive in how she's talking about this. Customers aren't going to want to buy from me, and they probably think that I'm trying to hide something or to do something that they don't like. And that's why we call it a trust disconnect. Taking that one step further into assertive behaviour. When we talk about behaviour, we talk about passive behaviour, assertive behaviour, and aggressive behaviour. And it's really important when we're talking about influence that we understand what assertive behaviour looks like. When we're talking about assertive behaviour, we're looking at 7 key areas. We're looking at what are the eyes doing, what is our posture doing, what's our voice doing, what's the content of what we're saying, how are we feeling, what's our appearance like, and what is our behaviour like. And when we're working with customers or staff, either or, we need to make sure that we understand what assertive behaviour looks like, and we need to be able to demonstrate that with customers. And we need to find the right language that demonstrates that we're assertive, and we need to find triggers that make people believe that we're aggressive or passive and work that through. In a leadership role, one of the things that we do spend a bit of time on is above the line and below the line behaviour. And I've snuck this slide in because I think that it's a really good one to think about when you look at influence. And when we look at this acronym ORBED, it's really nice because above the line behaviour is OR and below the line behaviour is BED. So or you may already know this. So if we look at what that is, it's ownership, accountability, and responsibility. And below the line behaviour is blame, excuses, and denial. So we need to understand that we can change the overall flavour of above the line and below the line behaviour and culture within our business. So an example of this could be that you observe one of your salespeople working with a customer, and you give them some feedback and you say to them, you didn't ask that customer if they wanted to buy at the end of the sales process. Now, in me using that word you, all of a sudden that salesperson gets quite defensive. And often what tends to happen is they say, oh, but you don't understand that I'd spoken to them before, or they come up with these excuses or try to deny that it's happening. So it's really important that we frame messages that enable us to get the type of behavior that we want. And if we want to build trust, respect, and enduring relationships, then we need to really focus on how we support above the line behavior and language, and really catch yourself with how you're framing things. So let's re-look at that, and we'll change that you message to an I message. And I messages are really important. If we look at that example, rather than say, you didn't ask if they wanted to buy, and you say to the salesperson, next time I want you to ask the customer if they want to buy at the end of the sales process. Changing this to something that's future focused by saying next time. So rather than, the blame game and you going into you didn't do this, what you do is you focus on the things that you want to see and you're future focused in your messaging. And it makes a huge difference to how those responses are and how you can start to be a lot more persuasive. I don't know about you guys, but I've got a 7-year-old daughter and she lives in you statements. She takes no accountability. She is under the line all the time. And when you look at really young children, they're very egocentric, so they're very focused on themselves. So my 7-year-old daughter, she's much more likely to say, you made me fall, you made me get angry, you made me this. She doesn't say, I get angry when. She is very much around, you're responsible for my behaviour, I'm not responsible for any of it. One of the big tips and tricks around above the line language is to change from you messaging to I messaging. And rather than talk about what happened in the past, focus about what you'd like somebody to do in the future. And I call that feed forward rather than feedback. So rather than talk about what someone didn't do, focus on what you'd like them to do in the future. It doesn't work all the time, but really think about framing you messages to I messages, and it makes a huge difference to the way in which you work with your team. Now let's go into the history of influence. So influence and persuasion has been studied for thousands of years, and the first recorded time is in ancient Greece. And you would have heard of a very famous philosopher called Aristotle. And Aristotle was a master of the art of persuasion, and he outlines his thinking in his work Rhetoric, where he outlines 3 important factors: ethos, pathos, and logos. Basically, it says ethos is credibility, where you persuade people using character. And this is all around your knowledge and expertise. And your character convinces the person that you're somebody who's worth listening to for advice due to your knowledge and expertise. So it's going back to that credible part of that trust continuum. Pathos, which is this emotional part, and it persuades people by appealing to their emotions. And pathos allows you to tie in emotional triggers that will capture a person's attention and enlist their support. And it's why emotive, informal language works really well with sales and marketing. And if we find ways to talk in a really nice, simple way with emotive words, we're much more likely to make a connection. And even, some customers, depending on how formal your product is, I guess, as well. But, some customers really like it that you're emotionally invested in your product. So it might be that I'm showing a customer a really cool multi-purpose plug that they can brand and give out as conference gifts to a customer. For me to say, I love this product, and for me to be emotionally connected to it is actually as good as the customer being. So sometimes it's not even about the customer engaging emotionally. If we're feeling it and we're talking about it in that way, it does make a big connection. Finally, logos, which is logical, and it persuades people by appealing to their intellect. And it's the logical approach to this. In my observation, in most sales that I observe in New Zealand and Australia, is we spend far too much time on this logical part. And we need to make sure that we're building credibility and emotional connections before we work on the logical side. So always start with credibility, move through to emotional, and then what you want to do is to appeal to people's intellect. So of the three, ethos always must come forward first, and you're really looking at the end to back up your arguments with that logical part of what you're using for persuasion. So if we jump forward a few millennia, I'm going to jump into the 1930s, where there was a very famous book written by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So Dale Carnegie was an American writer and lecturer, and he developed all sorts of famous courses in self-improvement, salesmanship, and interpersonal skills. He actually came from a pretty impoverished background and really tried to study how he could be as likable as possible and get people to comply with his requests. And one of the core ideas in his books is that it's possible to change other people's behavior by changing your own behavior to them. And I won't spend too much time on this, but it's interesting because this book is still in publication today, and there are still courses right around the world based on this work. So it gets updated all the time. It's still in publication, and it's been in print since 1936. And basically what it says is that if you want to increase your likability, you need to find ways to connect with people. And it's about being genuinely interested in them, smiling, doing simple things like using the person's name when you're talking to them, put the other person front and center around the conversation, listen more, talk less, and do what you can to make the other person feel important. So when we're talking about how do you build likability, one of the first things that I would do if somebody doesn't know how to be more likable is I'll say, read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because it still has a lot of validity in today's world. Before we go into the modern pillars of influence, I just want to touch on persuasive words and how you apply these to your business. And words do make a big difference, and research shows us that a single word can make a big difference, especially in sales and marketing. And there are all sorts of persuasive words, but usually words that are smaller and emotive make the biggest difference. So words play a huge part in helping our brains decide which products to buy. All sorts of variables that we use, but one thing that's proven time and time again is that words do matter, and certain words sell better. And it's really cool these days because of the algorithms that we can analyze sitting behind some of the e-commerce systems or marketing tools that we have. I do some really cool things where we'll have the same text basically and just change out a few different words. And from that, what we can do is research what words impact what type of behavior from customers. But what the words that we tend to look at a lot are because, you, free, easy, new, sale. And I love these words because they're little bitty words. They go right into that really easy, informal way to work with people that makes you likable. And the research behind these words has shown that over and over again that they work. And we need to remember also that going into the 2020s is that our attention spans are shorter than ever. In fact, a study of Microsoft says that the average attention span has dropped 12 seconds to 8 seconds since the year 2000. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Another study from Nielsen Group reminds us that online it's even more important because readers are only scanning content these days, not reading line by line. So we need to be really mindful of that when we're putting together headlines for our email marketing, or when we're putting together some of our text on websites or blogs, to use words that make it very easy for customers to understand what we're saying. And I think it's really important that if it's best practice for us to put in a marketing situation, then we need to think about how do we practice that with our salespeople to apply those words into our sales process. When we talk about science, physiology, and neuromarketing, it is always looking at three parts of the brain. And sorry, I don't know where my high-res brain has gone, so I've just had to put this one in. It's a little bit fuzzy. And basically it's saying that there's three parts of the brain. There's the old brain, which is around decision-making. There's the middle brain, which is around the emotional processing, and the new brain, which is rational thinking. And this ties in with the work of Aristotle, 2,500 years ago as well. What we need to do is that first impact on decision-making is we need to appeal to the old brain. And to appeal to the old brain, we need to make sure that we understand that the old brain is the most primitive. And the words that we use to the old brain will often be the words that are the most direct, the most arresting, the most visual words that you have. So keeping it simple makes a big difference when you're working with words with customers. Just want to pick up my favorite word to use with customers, especially when I'm selling product rather than a service, or if I'm selling multiple types of solutions to customers. The word because is hugely influential when selling a product, and there's been all sorts of experiments for the last 30 or 40 years that prove that this is correct. And when you put in the because, what it does is it gives people the reason why you're recommending the product. It's underused and it adds so much compliance when we use it in sales and requests. And human beings love to have a reason for doing something. Funnily enough, when you look at the research, and also, as I say, there's all sorts of research around this, sometimes you can have really crap reasons. You don't even need to have fantastic reasons. Just having any reason will be enough to get people to comply with what you want. I always train people to use these exact words. I recommend, then the product that you're recommending, and then actually saying the word because, and then maybe 2 or 3 reasons because. And it usually ties in, or should always tie in, with the questioning that you've uncovered. We're looking at pain points with the customer or areas of need. So training your team to say the words I recommend, the product, and then because will make a significant difference to getting customers to trust you. It makes you look confident, it makes you sound assertive without sounding aggressive, and customers think, oh gosh, that person really knows what they're talking about, and makes a big difference. There are a few problem words, and I don't want to delve into this too much, but just to keep in the back of your mind, there's 2 words that I want to talk about today. The first word is but. It's often an issue with leadership in giving feedback, but it can be misused in a variety of ways. And basically, but acts like a mental eraser, and it often buries whatever you've said before it, and it makes communication spiral down rather than spiral up. There's a train of thought, and I agree, that everything that comes after a but is where the emotional weight goes. So if you've got mixed messaging where you want to say something positive and you want to say something negative, then you need to think about the way in which you say it. And most people, when I'm working with them, frame the positive first, then say but, and then say the negative. Now the problem is with that, as soon as you've said but, everybody forgets exactly whatever you said that was good, positive, and they just focus on the negative coming up. And sometimes you use it so often that people just are waiting for the but to come through. So if you do have mixed messages, let's do it something really simple, like maybe a friend inviting you to go out to dinner, but you can't. So often what I'll hear people do, if we use this example, I'd love to go, but I can't make it. And so what tends to happen is it just kind of like, oh, well, that's no good. But if you say it in the reverse way, I can't make it tonight, but I would love to have gone. Thank you for the invite. You're finishing on something really positive and upbeat, and it just does make a difference to how people feel. Really be careful when you're using the word but. Try to take it out of conversations whenever you can. If you can't, then you must put the negative part at the front and the positive part at the end, because that's where the emotional weight goes. The other word that I'm not a huge fan on is the word no. Now, my favourite word in the world is yes. And one of the techniques that I use in selling is getting customers to say yes to multiple things. And incrementally over a period of a sales call, the more yeses you get, the more likely you are to influence a customer to say yes at the end. Now, you can't always say yes to every customer request. So there are times that you do need to say no. And what you need to do is to think about with your people how they're positioning things that are a no. And in service interaction, when a customer hears no, it does a number of things, and it tends to have negative outcomes, all because of that one word. So staff need to find a way to be truthful and still try to find a way to get around saying no in a way that doesn't trigger a negative emotional reaction and all the bad outcomes that come along with that. So when I work with businesses, I often analyse the situations that we have staff saying no. Usually you can group these interactions into like areas, and we can practice how we rephrase things so we can be more positive about how we're messaging. Classic one that I find all the time is when we've got products out of stock. So a customer might ring and want a specific pen branded, and you don't have that pen in stock, and they might need something by the end of next week branded. What you don't want to say is we don't have that pen, we've run out of that pen in stock. What's a nice way to do it is to say what we do have is, and then talk about what you can do rather than what you can't do. If a customer needs something branded by next Friday and you can't do it, rather than say I wouldn't be able to get that to you by Friday, what you say is you rephrase it and you say what we will be able to do is to get that to you by the following Wednesday. So what you want to be doing with your people is listening for when they're saying no to customers and thinking about, did that create a negative flow with the conversation? Could we have rephrased it in a way that would make an impact? And you'll find that usually it only takes 2 or 3 different cue cards on some very specific things that make a big difference to how your people are working with customers. Now let's get into the juicy stuff. The psychology of persuasion, how to influence customers to say yes or comply. And we will be focusing, as I say, on customers. Now the underlying principle that we're going to work on today was based on the work of Robert Cialdini, and he is professor of psychology at Arizona State University, and he researched and wrote a book called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. And it's just one of the great enduring works of social psychology, one that I use all the time. And when you look at all sorts of research in the last 30 years and some of the latest books on influence and how to build influence with customers or people, whatever it may be, this work underpins everything. So what I try to do is to really put a lens over how I'm applying these 6 principles to my business all the time. So let's go through these. There are 6 key principles, and the first one's reciprocity, commitment, we've got authority, social validation, liking, and scarcity. In his study, he outlined these 6 universal principles of influence, and they're really useful and effective in a wide range of circumstances in business. And I know that age, gender, personality type, and background all make a difference to how people are influenced, but these universal principles still apply. I said before that I try to use these all the time in business. With everything that I do, I try to use at least 2 of these in every time that I'm with customers or marketing or putting something together. And we spoke about this a little bit earlier, that in business, it's a bit like Darwin's natural selection. People or businesses that are around after a period of years, like you guys, you're likely to be doing things that enable you to survive. So you're likely to be doing a lot of these things anyway. So just for the next 15 minutes, maybe just think about how you could be more deliberate in these, or if it's something that you're not doing, think about how you could apply that to your business. So I'm going to go through the 6 principles and some very famous research for a lot of these principles. And then we're going to finish up with applying that to APPA members and what that means for our business and how we want to be working with customers. First of all, reciprocity. I love this. It's very easy to do, and it is so important when we're working with people, and people are more willing to do something for you if you've already done something for them first. And we see it all the time with our personal lives. If a friend invites you to their party, it kind of feels as if there's an obligation to invite them to a future party that you might be hosting. If a colleague does you a favor, then in the back of your mind, you owe that colleague a favor. I see this all the time, even just as something simple as going out for an after work drink. You buy your colleague or your friend a drink, a beer at the bar, and in their mind they're thinking, oh, I need to buy the next round. There's a social obligation for it. No, not everyone is that way, but most people are. So one of the best demonstrations of the principle of reciprocity comes from studies that have been conducted in restaurants, of all things. And if you think about the last time that you visited a restaurant, there's a good chance that the wait staff will have given you some type of gift, and probably at the same time that they bring you the bill. And depending on the restaurant, it will probably be the size of the gift. It could be a liqueur, fortune cookie, or maybe even a simple mint. So here's the question. Giving a mint have any influence over how much tip that you're likely to leave them? Well, most people say no, but that mint can make a difference. A small difference, but it can still make a difference. And studies show that giving diners a single mint at the end of their meal increases tips by 3%. It's 3% is 3%. Interestingly though, if the gift is doubled and 2 mints are provided, the tips don't double, they quadruple. They're a 14% increase in tips if you give 2 mints rather than 1 mint. But the most interesting of all facts is that if the wait staff changes the way in which they give that second mint, it makes a significant difference. And an example of that could be the wait staff gives the bill with 1 mint in it, walks away, then pauses, turns back and says, for you nice people, here's an extra mint. And all of a sudden, tips go through the roof. A 23% increase, influenced not only just by what was given, but how it was given. Cosmetic companies do this all the time with free makeovers, and I think they do it extremely well. And I've had an example recently where the clinic counter at a pharmacy down the road gave me a call. They've got their new summer products out. They want to show me the products on my skin and to give me a free makeover. So of course I say, no, don't worry about me. I'm not going to buy anything. You go to a customer that you're more likely to get some money from, because I'm not going to buy anything. I'm absolute about that. They say, Toni, it's absolutely obligation free. We'd just love you to come and see these new colours, and I think you'd really enjoy them. So I go, okay, you've twisted my arm. Now, most people, even if they say that they're not going to buy, and this is including me, feel at the end of it, think, gosh, I really feel as if I need to buy it. And I've never gone to any type of makeover event, no matter what I've said in my mind, without buying things afterwards. You really do feel obligated. And, we see that in a range of different ways when we're looking at the B2B market and office products or promotional products. And what I love in here is this is where samples sit, and we'll talk about that when we're talking about how these examples can fit into APPA and what you're doing. Consistency and commitment. So this is all about getting people to publicly commit. And that is that, and the theory is that people like to be consistent with things that they've previously said or done. And when seeking to influence using the commitment principle, you need to look for voluntary, active, public commitments. Now, when I say public commitments, it doesn't mean that other people need to be there, that you need witnesses to what you're doing. You need to get customers to say that commitment out loud, basically. basically. And I've got a really good example of this. When in the 90s, I worked for a car rental company, and in my role, I was responsible for the reservations department. We had a terrible issue with no-shows, is what we called them in car rental, and certainly for the domestic corporate market, where people had meetings that were cancelled, and people just wouldn't even think about calling the car rental company. In our script, when we asked customers to call us if they were unable to make their appointment, we used to say, please give us a call if you can't make the reservation, and continue talking. We changed that to a closed question, and the closed question was, will you call and let us know if you're unable to make the reservation? And then we trained our staff to wait for the customer to say yes. And with that public commitment, the saying yes out loud, we halved the amount of no-shows that we had. And this technique is used in restaurants equally successfully all the time. So changing a few words to get customers to agree really makes a big difference. I use this technique in sales and B2B sales all the time. And some ways in which I might ask a question might be, other than price, what do I need to do to win your business? And then if a customer says, well, if you can prove to me that you can manage our brand identity, then I know that if I demonstrate that I can do that and I get the pricing right, then I've got the business. Because customers are going to be more likely to let you know what would motivate them to change or to make a decision, but also once they've publicly committed to it, they're more likely to do it as well. Principles of influence with authority. So we spoke about authority as it relates to the trust continuum. This is one of the key pillars in influence as well. And authority is the professional trust. This is your credibility. And it's not about what you know, your experience, or your qualifications. It's about what your customers think you know. And that's a really important bit. And I love this cartoon at the top here. What's an expert? How do you spot the difference? And we need to find ways to enable customers to spot the difference. So if people believe that you know what you're talking about, they're much more likely to accept your expertise, and they're much more likely to follow you for compliance. We need to make sure that you're set up to be as credible as possible. And what the science is telling us is that it's important to signal to others what makes us credible. And there's all sorts of different ways that we can do this. And it's really important that we realize that even things that we say about somebody else can make a difference about how customers believe we are credible. And an example of that is with some research out of the States. And a group of real estate agents wanted to increase both the number of property appraisals and the number of subsequent contracts that they wrote. And what they did was they worked with their reception staff. And yes, I know not that many people have reception staff these days, but anyway, they changed the script from their reception staff about how they handed over that phone call to them. What they were trained to do is they were trained to let the customer know what made that person credible. For example, if a customer interested in letting a property, they were told, lettings, let me connect you to Sandra, who has over 15 years experience letting properties in this area. So what we're doing is we're letting people know why somebody is credible, or why they're the best person to hand them over to. Or it could be the customer wanted more information about selling properties, and they were told, speak to Peter, our head of sales. He has over 20 years experience selling properties. I'll put you through now. The impact of this expert introduction in this research led to a 20% increase in the number of appointments and a 15% increase in the number of signed contracts. Now, I'm fanatical about this, especially with the businesses that I work with. So with office products, when I'm working with companies in New Zealand, Australia that sell office supplies, it might be a customer rings up and they want to talk about furniture fit outs. I'll say, let me introduce you to Bob, our furniture specialist. So whenever I'm handing over to somebody else to deal with that customer, I'm always letting the customer know why this will be the best person to deal with their needs. I work with pharmacy in New Zealand, and I do the retail training for the Pharmacy Guild. And this is a really interesting one, because I'm often working inside pharmacies, looking at merchandising, marketing within the store. So customers come up and ask me questions, and really I don't know much about anything when it comes to pharmacy. In this capacity, I really wanted to prove that what you wore made a big difference to how people saw you. And in pharmacy, often pharmacists wear a lab coat at the back of the dispensary, and people at the front end are dressed like bankers. Why? I've got no idea, but that's the way that they work things. I've gone and stood in the front end of retail and pharmacy with a white coat on. And people go, well, that's silly. It's also old-fashioned. People don't like it. Well, I've got the statistics to prove what happens when I'm wearing a white coat. And if I'm on the floor and the only person in the white coat, 100% of the time people come to me. You know, it is that big a difference. So people associate the white coat with things like knowledge, expertise, their doctor, you know, all of these really positive things people associate with a white coat. So people say to me, Toni, you can't just put on a white coat whenever you like. And it's like, why? Is there the white coat police somewhere that I need to talk to? And it's crazy, because when you actually break it down and look at it, the top cosmetic companies put their people in white coats. You look at the Clinique counter next time that you're out buying something, they're all in white coats. Why? Because it makes them look as if they know what they're talking about. It might be somebody who's brand new to Clinique, doesn't know all the products. You put them in a white coat and you're much more likely to believe them. So, you know, really think about authority. You know, it even could be branding specialists. You know, think about your footer that you've got with your business and how you market yourself as an authority around what you do. Next, we're going to look at social validation. And this is about, as independent as we like to consider ourselves, we, you know, love to be part of a crowd. And people will look at the actions and behaviours of others to determine their own. So this is where we want to look at top sellers, customers' favourites, staff favourites. So itemising products, whether it's your website, whether it's your catalogue, whatever it is, as a top seller, customer's favourite or staff pick, makes a difference to how people perceive that product. And most people think if other people are buying it, then it must be a good product. So it's certainly well worth looking at. And if you've got a retail store, it's really important that your top sellers are ticketed in this way. If you sell through catalogues or through online, then it's really important that you do identify your top sellers, because it does make a difference to customers. And sometimes, you know, you might even want to take it that step further and say faster selling. You know, there are all sorts of different ways to make that work. Liking is really important. And again, this is the second part of our trust continuum, and what that means, that we tend to like people that are similar to us, and we tend to trust people that we like. It is an important component to get say yes to what we want them to do. I guess the question that you scratch your head with is, what causes one person to like another? And persuasion science tells us that there are a number of different factors. You know, we like people that are similar to us, we like people who pay us compliments, and we like people who cooperate with us. And we need to make sure that we understand the ABC of sales. And when I was starting to sell 30 years ago, my manager always used to say, always be closing, always be closing. And that's just a load of rubbish. What we need to be doing is always be connecting. How are we connecting with customers? How are we finding things that we've got in common? How do we represent ourselves to our customers that we're like them and we've got an innate understanding of their business and what they're doing? To harness this powerful principle of liking, be sure to look for areas of similarity that you share with others and find ways to connect. And if you haven't already read it, you know, read Dale Carnegie's book on how to win friends and influence people. You know, it's a great read, it's an easy read, and it's still relevant today. Lastly, I want to talk about the last pillar, which is scarcity. I've got a couple of different examples up on that slide. And scarcity, simply put, is that people want more things that they have less of. Great example of this is when British Airways announced in 2003 that they would no longer be operating the twice daily London to New York Concorde flight because it had become uneconomical to run. Sales the very next day went through the roof. Now, nothing had changed. There's nothing different about the Concorde. There's nothing different about whether or not it flew faster, the service wasn't better, the airfares didn't drop, but simply because it had become a scarce resource, people wanted it more. And, you know, I think booked out for just about the rest of their flights. You know, it makes such a big difference. And, you know, when you come to effectively persuading others through marketing activity or through sales activity, it's important that people understand that people value things that there's less of. You would have done marketing for different businesses, but often people will be concerned if it, you know, I'm putting together and it might be, I don't know, it might be the latest reusable straws, and I might get a special deal, and it might be that there's 100 available. And so a market that's, you know, hurry, 100 of these products only, get in quick. what will happen with some of the businesses that I work with, they'll get their knickers in a knot and say, no, we need an unlimited amount. And, that's terrible. I had a customer come in and we'd already sold 100. I felt terrible. I was terribly embarrassed. And rather than thinking, isn't that fantastic? Because we've used scarcity and kept a limited number, we've really created more value for that product. And I think that it's so evident when you see e-commerce site, and I've got a strip from Air New Zealand up there, as soon as there's 5 seats or less available, they've got a big red marker that goes through. I've got on the left-hand side there a screenshot from ASOS, which is a clothing site, so they mark where there's low in stock. It could be that information is only available in a limited way. And don't feel bad about saying that something's sold out. It really isn't anything to worry about. It is something that you need to make sure that customers know that they need to get in quick, that from time to time we're going to have some amazing deals. And when we put that there's a limited amount, it means that they need to get in quick if they want to be able to get that deal. I just grabbed this the other night because I think that, there are all sorts of different retailers online that do this really, really well. And you can see where all my red squares are different ways that people have used words or the pillars of influence. So you've got bestseller, great value, only 2 reams less, risk-free. You've got the rating, very good. So your social validation there. You've got free cancellation. So, these words that make an impact, and using these pillars, when you look at e-commerce sites, you tend to see this is kind of best-in-class stuff. This was .com too. So what does this mean to your business as an APPA member and for the products that you have? So let's just go through them top line one for one. And I want to start off with just looking at authority. I really would encourage you to think about how do you use words to introduce different people in your business. Do you use the word expert? Do you demonstrate your expertise? Do you talk about that with your customers? Do you train your staff if they're going to put a call through to you, how they should introduce you and how they're demonstrating expertise? What are you doing with your email footers? Are you talking about the fact that you're a branding expert, or you're that you're an expert in best practice corporate branding? What is it that makes you special, and how do you market that to your customers? Reciprocity, for me, this is huge for you guys because it's all about sampling. And you've got such an amazing product to sample, and people, if they've got samples in their hand, then they feel more obligated to buy from you. And your product has, it generates so much fun and excitement that it is a great way for you to connect with customers. And if you don't already, have it in your marketing plan. Keep lines available in your marketing plan, so you've always got a sampling program happening at any given time. It really does make a difference. And also free stuff falls in here as well. And I've noticed that some of your members will give some free stuff out, especially if it's for fundraising or whatever. These are the types of activities that do, again, motivate customers to use you in the future. Now let's look at scarcity. It's all about limited time offers and feeling really confident about having limited time or limited amount of products, and it really does make a difference. You want people to value what you've got and don't feel bad about running out of stuff. It's a good thing. Next, what have we got next? Liking. How do you find ways to connect with your customers? Well, a lot of us are small and medium businesses that work in local areas. So, it can be local like you. If I'm based in a suburb in Auckland called Howick. So if I was dealing with another Howick business, I'd say that I'm Howick based just like you. If I was talking to an Auckland business, then I'd say I'm in Auckland. If I was talking to a New Zealand business, then I'd say that I was a New Zealand business. So, I'm always finding ways to connect and to make sure that customers understand that I'm a business that understands them and that I'm working with ways to connect with them as well. Remember the ABC of sales. It's not always be closing, it's always be connecting, and you need to find ways to connect with customers. Next, consistency or commitment. I call it commitment, but it flip-flops a little bit depending on what literature that you use. And remember, public commitment directs future action, and it's really easy to use in B2B sales, and it's really makes a big difference when you use this at a variety of different places throughout your sales process. Where I find that it works really, really well is at triaging part, when I'm working with a customer to really understand their needs. And, you know, we need to make sure that at the beginning of that process, we understand what's the one thing that I need to do that would motivate you to choose us. And asking the customer that question makes a significant difference to whether or not people will buy from you in the future, because a customer then is going to tell you what will motivate them to change. And often what I get from people is they'll say to me, Toni, I don't know what to do. I've got the pricings right, I've got competitive offer, I've got all of these things, and the customer is still not saying yes. And I'll say, well, what's the one thing that's going to motivate them to buy from us? And they say, I don't know, I haven't asked. And so we need to ask, because once the customer sees what would motivate them to buy from us and you do it, then they're much more likely to buy. And lastly, really easy one, social proof top sellers. So you should always make sure that not only your marketing, but the language. So if I'm selling something and I'm talking to a customer, I'll talk about top sellers or what my favorite product is. Again, it makes a difference. I've just downloaded this example from an amazing APPA member locally here in Auckland, and it's a fundraising factory, and they've got all sorts of really cool stuff on their website that's either free, here's an example of a free tool, but they give free advice and some great places as well. So in summary, focus with the trust continuum, building on those two pillars of influence, your likability and your credibility. And those, to me, are what are the two building blocks of everything to do with influence and persuasion. Use 6 principles in your business, you know, activities like sampling for reciprocity, phrases around authority, you know, I'll just go and get a local branding expert. Identify the top sellers and create scarcity with limited time offers. And if nothing else, whenever you're doing product sales, get your team to say, I recommend because, and get them used to creating some muscle memory with that language, because that does make a big difference to what you sell. Now, I'm just going to finish up with a caution. The idea of persuading somebody to do something is sometimes confused with manipulation, even if it's based on rational argument. And manipulation is deceitful, and you won't be influential for long if you behave this way. The key to using persuasion effectively is to leave the other person feeling empowered by going along with you. You never want to trick them into doing something that's not in their best interest. And, you know, even though you might get a short-term sale, in the long term, it will ruin your reputation and really ruin the influence that you have in the market. And I just want to leave you with this thought. With great power comes great responsibility, or so a superhero's uncle once said. And though we don't have superpowers, we do have the power to influence others and the responsibility to do it well. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining us for another APPA webinar. We'll have all of the material available through the APPA support office next week. And if you want to contact me directly and you have any other questions, or you want some clarification on any of those points, then do feel free to get that contact through. My details will be available on that documentation. Next one. So I look forward to seeing everyone in November. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.